Hi students, in this video we will discuss about functions. What is a function? What are the different types of functions? And what are the advantages of functions and the syntax for a function we will discuss. Now here, before moving to functions, now let us see, I want to display the output in this format. On the screen, I want to display the message hi 5 times. That is hi 5 times I want to display. How are you 5 times I want to display, as well as again hi 5 times I want to display. Okay, now let us assume that in order to display the output in this format, so the knowledge what we have is using loops. We can use any of the loops, either while loop or for loop or do while loop we can use. Here this code will display the message hi 5 times. Whatever the code we have written here, this code will display first hi 5 times. And again this code will display how are you 5 times. And whatever the code we have written here, this code will display again hi 5 times. Okay, now when we run our program, it displays the output in this format. Now, so here I want to show you one drawback in this code. Now as this is a 2 or 3 lines of code we have written in this format. Let us assume that in order to display this part or in order to perform this particular job, we require some 100 lines of code. Again, if you want to perform the same task, the same 100 lines of code whatever we have written here, the same code we are repeating in our program. Whatever we have written earlier, the same code we are repeating in our program. That is 100 lines here, again the same 100 lines we are repeating here. That is the same task if you want to perform, we are writing the code repeatedly. That is repetition of data is there. This is one drawback with normal programs. To rectify this problem, now I will show you the alternate method. Now what we are doing here I have taken one block with the name x. Inside this x named block, I have written the logic to display hi 5 times. And in a y named block, I have written the logic to display how are you 5 times. Now inside the main function, so I am calling x. So whenever we call x, what happens here is control will jump to this particular block. Whatever we have written, it will execute, and it will, after completion of the execution, control will go back. Again, when you call y, control will jump to this particular block, executes the statements of this block, and returns back after completion of this code. Again, you want to perform the same task, so no need to write 100 lines of code. So simply call that particular block. Again, when you call that particular block, control will jump to that particular block, executes the statements of that block, and returns back to the caller. Here this program and this program, both the programs will give the same output. Now can you tell me which one is better, first part or second part? Second part is better, because so in this case there is no repetition of data. Once a block of code is defined, whenever we want to perform that particular task, we are calling that particular block. These separate blocks are called as functions. So what we will do in function, earlier whatever we used to write inside the main function, the same code we will write in a separate block. That separate block is called as function. Sir, why we need to write inside a separate block? There are many advantages of functions. The main advantage I will tell you, repetition of data will not be there. That is, once it is defined, it can be called any number of times. The large program is divided into small blocks. So in this way there are many advantages with functions. Now can you tell me what is a function? It is a subprogram which performs a specific task, or you can call a block of code written outside the main is called as function. Here the logic and all will not change. Earlier whatever we used to write inside the main, the same code we will write in a separate block. That separate block is called as function. Okay, now let us see. So what is a function and what are the types of functions and advantages of functions? Here we can call a function is a subprogram which performs a specific task, or which performs a particular task, or you can call a block of code written outside main is called as function. That is, instead of writing in main, we are writing in separate block. So what are the different advantages of functions? So this repetition of data will not be there, increases program readability. That is, instead of writing in one place, we can separate the related code in separate blocks. So we can divide the complex program into small blocks, reduces chance of error because separation of code is there. Then modify a program becomes easier. No need to change the complete code, only in that block. Whenever we want to modify, we will make the changes. These are some of the advantages of functions. Now these functions are mainly divided into two types. Excuse me. These functions are mainly divided into two types. One is predefined functions, the other one is user-defined functions. Predefined functions. So what are predefined? The functions which are already defined in C are called as predefined functions. Example for predefined functions, we can write printf is the best example, then scanf, sqrt, all these are called as predefined functions. So what is predefined? The functions which are defined by the user are called as predefined functions. The functions which are already defined in C are called as predefined functions. These predefined functions are also called as library functions or built-in functions. Library functions or built-in functions. Library or built-in functions. So these functions cannot be changed. If we want, we can make use of these functions, but we cannot change these functions. Such functions are called as predefined functions. Now again we have user-defined function. What is a user-defined function? Which is defined by user or which is developed by the user is called as user-defined functions. The code inside this function we can change or modify whenever we want. Such functions we call them as user-defined functions. Example for user-defined functions: x, y, sum, is prime, is vowel, whatever we want, we can, any valid names we can give. Okay, so that is predefined functions. Now the syntax for a function. What is the syntax for a function? Here for a function there will be, so first thing is, for every function there will be return type, then function name will be there, argument list, and the body of the function. Now example, so I will take one example and let me explain. So till now we used to write one main function. Till now we used to write a main function. So how we used to write main? Int main, so empty parenthesis, then body of the function, whatever we write inside the main we call it as body of the function, then return some value, 1 or 0 we used to write. Excuse me. Now here function name, what is the name of the function? Main, we call it as name of the function. Here while defining a function we can define our own function name. Function name is main. Now return type. What is return type? Here in this example, what is the return type? Int is called as return type. This integer is called as return type. So return type meaning which type of value the function will return. Which type of value the function will return. Now in this case, suppose if you write here in place of int, if you write here void, no need to write the return statement. That is, this void represents function will not return any value. If you write here void, this return statement is not required. So, okay, so return type, return type can be any data type. Return type can be any data type. Suppose if the return type is int, it represents that function will return an integer value. And if the return type is float, it represents function will return a float value. If the return type is char, it represents function will return a character value. And if the return type is void, it represents function will not return any value. That is, void functions will not return any value. Okay, now here in order to return a value, we use a statement called, this return statement is used for returning a value. In order to return a value, we use a statement called return statement. Return some statement, that is return, return some value we will pass. Okay, so this return statement is used to return a value. Then the syntax here is this one, return space value. At a time, the function can return only one value, because after execution of this return statement, control will go back to the caller. That is, from where the function has been called to that location it will return. That is about return type. I will repeat once again. Return type represents the type of the value function is going to return. Return type can be any one of the data type. If the return type is int, it will return an integer value. If the return type is float, it will return a float value. Return type is char, it will return a character. If return type is void, it will not return any value. Then function name can be any valid name. Then argument list. Now argument list represents the number of arguments the function will take. For example, if you remember, while calling a function called, now let me take some examples. So while calling a function called sqrt function, if you take sqrt, we used to call sqrt like this, res equal to sqrt of number. That is, while calling this function, we need to pass one argument, one number we need to pass to the while calling this function. Similarly, while calling to a function called result equal to, there is a function called pow x comma y. While calling this function, we need to pass two values. Then while calling a function called strlen, we need to pass one string to this particular function. We need to pass one string to this particular function. That is, so this argument list represents the number of arguments and the type of the arguments the function will take. Which type of values and how many values the function will take, that is represented by argument list. Then the body of the function. Body represents the content of the function, we call it as body of the function. Okay, that is the syntax for a function. Then based on return type and function name, there are 4 different types of functions. Based on return type and argument list, there are 4 different types of functions. The first one is function without arguments, without a return value. That is, no arguments and no return value. It will not take any arguments. It will not take any argument means it will be empty. It will be like this. The first one. So let me write the code here. So first one. So first one, what is that? No, without arguments, without return type. So let us take the example void some, you can give the name x, any name you can give, then empty parenthesis, then no return type. This is the first method one. That is, this function name is x, empty parenthesis represents it will not without arguments. If the return type is void, it is without returning a value. And the second one is function with arguments and without a return value. With arguments and without a return value. So here the second one represents without a return value, so void x. Let us assume x is the function name. Here we need to mention the argument list like int x comma int y and so on. We need to mention the argument list, that is how many arguments this function will take, we need to mention. Then the code we need to write for a function. This is with no return value, that is without a return value and with arguments. Then the third type of function. What is third type of function? Function with arguments and a return value. That is function will take the arguments as well as it will return the value. Best example from predefined functions is sqrt and pow functions. Third type. So let us assume int x, or let us assume int factorial int n. Here, so I am taking the example for factorial. So we will pass one number to the function to calculate the factorial. So this function will calculate the factorial of that number, and at the end it will return the value of n. So whatever the value it has been passed, n value, so it will calculate the factorial and the factorial will be returned. That is the result will be returned back to the caller. So here it will perform the operation. This is the third type. What is that? So return type is it will have a return type and it will take the parameters. This is third type of function. Argument will take and it will process on the value and the result will be returned back to the caller. Then the next one is fourth one. What is that? Function without arguments and with a return value. Then it will not take any arguments but it will return a value int x, then it will return the value. So this function, this type of functions we use very rarely, and one predefined function called random function, it will not take any arguments but it will return the value, which is used for generating a random number. Then getChar function, which will not take any argument but it will return a value. Okay, so these are the different types of functions based on argument list and return type. Sorry, no arguments and with a return value. These are the four types of functions. So in the next video we will see programs on these four different types. So first one with no arguments, no return value, and we will discuss the programs. Thank you for watching. See you in next video.